A crimson glow bathed the aged cinema, as twilight gave way to night. The marquee's faded letters, once proudly lit, now struggled against a backdrop of darkening skies. The cinema, an imposing, time-worn building with ornate architecture and a history steeped in glamour, stood on a bustling street in the heart of the city. Inside, velvet seats and a vast domed ceiling recalled a bygone era of silver screens and live orchestras. Tonight, however, something was terribly amiss. Marina Ortiz, a night shift projectionist with keen eyes and a steady hand, was making her usual rounds through the theater's labyrinth of corridors when she noticed an unusual silence emanating from one of the screening rooms. Normally filled with the soft murmur of film reels and the occasional rustle of popcorn bags, the room was empty and dark. As she pushed open the heavy door, Marina's flashlight swept across rows of abandoned seats. There, slumped in the middle of the aisle, lay a body. The victim was identified as Preston Blake, a mid-level cinema manager known for his meticulous attention to scheduling and his warm rapport with staff. His tailored suit, now crumpled and stained with dark patches, contrasted sharply with the pale, unmoving form on the cold, tiled floor. Preston's eyes, once lively and reflective of his dedication, stared blankly at the ornate ceiling, and his hands, slack and unmoving, clutched a single scrap of paper. The note, blotted and hastily torn, carried no flourish or dramatic message, only an ambiguous string of numbers and letters that seemed to hint at a secret left unresolved. Marina's heart pounded as she dialed 911. Within minutes, the echo of approaching sirens and the steady footsteps of uniformed officers filled the corridors. Forensic specialists, clad in blue coveralls, descended upon the screening room with methodical precision. They photographed every detail: the exact angle of Preston's body, the slight impressions of his shoes pressed into the worn carpet, the delicate scrap of paper trembling in his grasp. Even the dim hum of the air conditioning seemed to carry a note of melancholy, as if mourning the abrupt silence that had replaced the usual laughter and music. Detective Carmen Lee was assigned to the case, renowned for her unconventional investigative methods and her unerring ability to spot what others missed. Carmen arrived at the cinema just as the neon glow outside deepened into the inky embrace of night. Dressed in a tailored black jacket and carrying a small notebook, she moved slowly through the hushed corridors, her eyes absorbing every detail. The pattern of footprints that led from the projection booth to the screening room, the faint residue of a spilled drink near a concession stand, and the scrap of paper that lay as if deliberately dropped by the victim. Carmen's approach was methodical. Rather than forcing a narrative, she let the details accumulate like pieces of an intricate mosaic. Instead of adhering to a linear timeline, Detective Lee's investigation unfolded in overlapping layers, each adding new texture to a story that was rapidly gaining complexity. Her first lead came from a brief conversation with Julian Reyes, a ticket taker who had been stationed at the cinema's main entrance that night. "I remember Preston was a bit distracted earlier," Julian recounted, his voice low and thoughtful. "Usually he's the one who double-checks everything, always smiling at us. But that evening he was on his phone, looking over something, and his brow was furrowed. I couldn't tell what it was, but it didn't seem right." Julian's recollection, though fragmentary, suggested that Preston had been preoccupied with an issue that extended beyond his usual managerial duties. Next, Carmen interviewed Talia Rivera, a concession stand worker who had been busy serving late-night patrons. Talia remembered that during the evening rush, Preston had stopped by her booth, asking in hushed tones about discrepancies in the cinema's inventory logs. "He mentioned something about missing figures in our supply records," Talia said softly. "I thought it was just a clerical error, but now, hearing about what happened, I worry he might have discovered something much bigger than any of us imagined." Talia's words hinted at a growing unease among the staff, a sense that the carefully maintained routine had been compromised by a hidden irregularity. Determined to uncover the truth, Detective Lee obtained a warrant to search Preston Blake's modest apartment, located in a modest building not far from the cinema. The apartment was sparse, its single room furnished with a threadbare sofa, a small desk piled high with documents, and a window that framed the restless city below. The air carried the scent of stale coffee and worn paper. In a locked drawer of a battered desk, Carmen discovered Preston's personal journal, a leather-bound notebook with a cover marred by years of use. Its pages were filled with precise, careful handwriting that began with mundane entries, lists of daily tasks, notes on staffing schedules, and brief observations of the cinema's operations. Yet as the entries progressed, a darker tone emerged. In one entry, written just days before his death, Preston noted, "I have noticed recurring discrepancies in our supply records. Each shipment appears to be short by a small, almost imperceptible margin. At first, I assumed it was an error. But the consistency is too alarming. I fear that someone with access to our systems is diverting resources, and if I continue to pursue this, I may uncover a secret that others will kill to keep hidden." The final lines of the journal were abruptly cut off, as if his pen had been snatched away mid-sentence, leaving behind an ominous void that spoke volumes. Meanwhile, the cyber unit managed to recover fragments of deleted text messages from Preston's old mobile phone, a device with a cracked screen and scuffed keys that had clearly seen many late-night shifts. The recovered messages were brief and stark. One message simply stated, "Stop now," while another read, "Don't ask questions." Their terse, unembellished language was chilling, a clear warning that someone had tried to deter him from probing further. Although the messages offered little context, their cold brevity suggested that Preston had been receiving orders to cease his inquiry, and that those orders had likely come from someone with significant influence. Instead of pursuing a straightforward chronological narrative, Detective Lee opted to explore the broader context. With permission from the cinema's management, she gained access to the administrative records of the establishment. In a cramped office behind the main lobby, Carmen pored over both the digital logs and the original paper ledgers that detailed every transaction, from supply orders to inventory counts. Working with an experienced records clerk named Arturo, whose steady hands had preserved these documents for decades, Carmen meticulously compared the two sets of records. The differences were many, a single digit off in a total, a date altered by one day, but when analyzed over a span of several months, the discrepancies revealed a disturbing pattern. The digital logs consistently showed that every shipment was recorded as complete, while the handwritten records revealed small recurring shortages. Over time, these tiny variances had accumulated to a significant diversion of resources, a pattern that could not be explained by mere clerical error. Forensic accountants were brought in to analyze the financial implications. Their rigorous analysis revealed that the cumulative effect of these minor discrepancies had resulted in the misappropriation of a substantial sum, a sum that, when traced through a labyrinth of electronic transactions, ultimately led to an offshore account linked to a shell corporation. The financial trail was painstakingly reconstructed, each step confirming that the discrepancies were deliberate. The evidence pointed to a network of mid-level administrators within the cinema's management, potentially in collusion with external suppliers, who had exploited vulnerabilities in the record-keeping system for personal gain. As the investigation deepened, anonymous tips began arriving. A plain envelope left on the desk in the back office contained a typed note that read, "Every figure has a secret." Another tip, sent via a secure email address, simply urged, "Cease your investigation." Though these messages were brief, their tone was unmistakably ominous, an indication that someone with a vested interest in the cover-up was closely monitoring the inquiry. Federal agents, alerted by the mounting evidence, soon joined the investigation. Their state-of-the-art digital forensic tools allowed them to reconstruct a nearly complete timeline of the deleted messages from Preston's phone, revealing that the warnings had grown more frequent and urgent in the final days before his death. Simultaneously, forensic accountants produced intricate graphs that charted the incremental misappropriation of funds, demonstrating conclusively that the discrepancies in the records were part of a systematic cover-up. The combined evidence formed a damning mosaic, a carefully orchestrated fraud that had persisted for months, if not years, and had ultimately cost a man his life. Detective Lee compiled her findings into an exhaustive report, a voluminous dossier, spanning over 400 pages, that interwove photographs of the crime scene, scanned copies of Preston's journal entries, digital reconstructions of deleted messages, and detailed financial analyses. The report argued that the discrepancies in the cinema's records were not innocent mistakes but deliberate manipulations designed to divert funds for personal enrichment. It contended that Preston Blake's murder was a premeditated act, a ruthless move by those who had a stake in keeping their illicit scheme hidden. The dossier was submitted to the district attorney in a series of confidential briefings, its contents a searing indictment of a corrupt network that had betrayed the trust of the community. The district attorney, appalled by the breadth of the evidence and its implications for public integrity, convened a grand jury at the county courthouse, a stark utilitarian building known for its uncompromising approach to justice. Over several marathon sessions that extended into storm-riddled nights, expert witnesses testified about the digital forensic techniques used to recover the deleted texts, the statistical methods that demonstrated the improbability of random discrepancies, and the forensic accounting that traced the misappropriated funds to an offshore account. Their combined testimony was delivered with technical precision and an unyielding commitment to the truth. After lengthy deliberations, the grand jury returned indictments on multiple charges, including fraud, conspiracy, and accessory to homicide, charges that directly linked the systematic manipulation of records to the murder of Preston Blake. The trial that followed was a protracted legal battle unfolding over several weeks in a crowded courtroom packed with community members, legal experts, and a throng of journalists eager for transparency. Federal prosecutors presented their case with unwavering clarity, interweaving digital reconstructions of the deleted messages with detailed financial charts that illustrated how minor discrepancies, when aggregated over time, amounted to a substantial diversion of funds. A digital forensic specialist took the stand to explain how the recovered text messages, each a blunt command to stop investigating, had been meticulously pieced together, forming a timeline of escalating warnings. Forensic accountants unveiled intricate graphs that detailed the incremental financial losses, while witnesses recounted in measured tones how the original records had gradually been altered over time. Every minute detail, from the precise angle of a discarded piece of paper to the faint residue of blood on a marble column, was presented with clinical accuracy, forming a comprehensive narrative that left little room for doubt. When Detective Lee took the stand, her testimony was delivered with a blend of technical clarity and personal sorrow. She recounted, in painstaking detail, the moment she had discovered the body in that quiet corridor of the administration building, a moment marked by the echo of her footsteps on cool tile, the soft hum of digital logs, and the stark, unadorned scrap of paper clutched in the victim's hand. Her voice was steady as she described how every element of the investigation, from the recovered journal entries and reconstructed text messages to the painstaking comparisons between digital logs and paper records, coalesced into an undeniable portrait of deliberate corruption. The courtroom absorbed her every word, the silence punctuated only by the measured nods of the jurors as they comprehended the full magnitude of the fraud. Ultimately, the grand jury's indictments resulted in the conviction of several mid-level administrators and technical operatives directly implicated in the manipulation of the cinema's records. They received lengthy prison sentences, and their names were entered into the public record as stark reminders of the cost of abusing public trust. Yet many in the community felt that complete justice was still out of reach. The highest-ranking conspirators, the masterminds who had orchestrated the diversion from behind layers of institutional protection, managed to exploit complex legal defenses, and their identities remained largely obscured in the final verdicts. This lingering ambiguity left a bitter reminder that even when significant corruption is uncovered, the deepest secrets can persist in the shadows. In the aftermath of the trial, the management of the cinema faced a dramatic transformation. Under intense public pressure and the scrutiny of independent auditors, the digital record-keeping systems were completely overhauled. New protocols mandated real-time logging of every transaction, robust encryption, and periodic publicly accessible audits, measures designed to restore transparency and prevent future manipulation. These sweeping reforms, though unable to erase the past, signified a renewed commitment to integrity and accountability in the management of the institution. Local media, committed to uncovering the truth, produced a series of investigative documentaries that meticulously detailed every aspect of the case, from the haunting discovery in the darkened auditorium to the painstaking digital reconstructions that unmasked a covert network of corruption. Public forums and town hall meetings sprang up in civic centers, where residents, academics, and civic leaders engaged in passionate debates about the ethics of digital record keeping and the importance of safeguarding public trust. The story of Preston Blake, a man whose unwavering commitment to uncovering discrepancies cost him his life, became a rallying cry for reform, a testament to the belief that every hidden detail matters and that the truth, no matter how obscured, will eventually emerge. For Detective Rivera, the case remained a defining chapter in her career, a constant reminder that every unaccounted discrepancy in the digital age can be a doorway to exposing profound corruption. In the quiet moments after long, sleepless nights, she would often sit in her modest office, surrounded by stacks of case files and illuminated by the soft glow of her computer, revisiting the recovered pages of Preston's journal and the terse messages that had once warned him to stop his inquiry. Each minute detail, every carefully documented anomaly, reinforced her resolve that the pursuit of truth is a lifelong duty, a duty that, despite its challenges, is essential to the integrity of society. Over the ensuing years, the legacy of the investigation reshaped not only the internal operations of the cinema, but also the broader community's approach to transparency and accountability. The reformed digital record-keeping systems, now fortified by cutting-edge technology and rigorous independent audits, served as a model for other cultural institutions. Public discussions about the importance of preserving unaltered historical records and the ethical responsibilities of digital data management became a fixture in community meetings and local university seminars. The story of Preston Blake evolved from a tale of tragic loss into a powerful symbol of resistance against corruption, a living reminder that even the smallest discrepancy, when pursued relentlessly, can expose vast networks of deceit. Though some elements of the conspiracy remained unresolved, most notably the true identities of the highest-ranking conspirators who managed to hide behind legal technicalities, the comprehensive reforms implemented in the aftermath of the trial provided a beacon of hope. New employees at the cinema were trained in ethical data management, and the importance of vigilance and independent oversight committees were established to continuously monitor every transaction. The legacy of the case served as an enduring lesson for all that no matter how carefully the truth is concealed, persistent inquiry will eventually unearth it. As the night deepened and the neon lights of the cinema flickered in a delicate dance with the darkness, the echoes of that long-ago investigation continued to resonate. The corridors, once tainted by hidden deceit, now stood as a testament to the unwavering commitment of a community that refused to be deceived. Every digital log, every recorded transaction became a symbol of transparency, meticulously preserved for all to see. And as the city's pulse beat steadily outside, the memory of Preston Blake and the relentless pursuit of truth by Detective Rivera endured, a beacon of hope, urging everyone to scrutinize every detail, to question every anomaly, and to stand steadfast in the pursuit of justice. The waning summer dusk had draped the amusement park in an uneasy twilight. The park, an expansive ground of bright rides and echoing laughter during the day, now lay silent and surreal under a pastel sky. Faded neon from once vibrant attractions struggled against the encroaching darkness, and a soft, balmy breeze carried the scent of sweet cotton candy and stale grease. Few dared to wander these grounds at night, but for a handful of security staff and night shift workers, the park was a familiar if eerie landscape. In a remote corner of the park, where the laughter of children and the clamor of roller coasters were distant memories, a shocking discovery was made. Under a battered canopy near the entrance to the funhouse, a lone security guard named Tarek Silva was conducting his final rounds. Tarek, with eyes honed by years of watching over the park's crowds, noticed a shape lying incongruously amid discarded ticket stubs and tangled streamers. Approaching slowly, his flashlight revealed the lifeless body of a man sprawled on the cracked concrete. The victim, later identified as Rowan Pierce, had been a middle management supervisor in the park's operations, respected for his punctuality and friendly, quiet manner. Now his tailored polo and khakis were rumpled and stained with dark patches of blood. His eyes were fixed in a final haunting stare, and his hand, still gripping a small scrap of paper, seemed to hold a silent plea, its faded ink barely decipherable in the weak beam of Tarek's light. Tarek's heart pounded as he fumbled for his radio. I found something over at the funhouse entrance," he stammered. Moments later, The area was inundated with uniformed officers, their voices calm yet determined, and forensic experts in blue coveralls began their painstaking documentation. Every detail, the exact placement of Rowan's body, the scattered remnants of his belongings, the subtle pattern of footprints in the wet dust was recorded meticulously. Detective Layla Navarro was dispatched to the scene. Known for her unorthodox approach and uncanny attention to the smallest clues, Layla arrived just as the last vestiges of twilight merged into night. She stepped gingerly into the deserted funhouse entrance, the echoes of distant carnival music and the rustling of plastic decorations providing a surreal counterpoint to the gravity of the moment. Instead of rushing, she paused and surveyed the scene. The discarded paper in Rowan's hand, though nearly illegible, hinted at a message left in haste. Layla made a careful note in her worn leather notebook. Every footprint, every drop of blood on the weathered concrete, every torn edge of the paper was a piece of a puzzle that she intended to solve. Rather than impose a linear narrative immediately, Detective Navarro allowed the investigation to unfold organically. She began by interviewing individuals who had been in the park that night. Her first conversation was with Naomi Jenkins, a ride operator whose shift had ended just an hour earlier. "Rowan was always diligent," Naomi said quietly, her eyes clouded with disbelief. "That night I saw him walking along the maintenance corridor near the funhouse. He was checking something on his phone, looking worried. I thought he was just dealing with a minor scheduling issue. But now, I wonder if he was onto something much more serious." Naomi's recollections, though sparse, hinted that Rowan had been preoccupied with discrepancies in the park's operations, a puzzle he might have been trying to piece together. Next, Layla spoke with Malik Brown, a part-time vendor who sold souvenirs near the roller coaster. Malik remembered that earlier in the evening Rowan had stopped by his cart. He asked about some missing tickets from the day's sales and then mentioned something about numbers that didn't add up in the records. Malik recalled, frowning as he struggled to remember details. "I assumed it was just a routine check, but he seemed anxious, like he was trying to catch a mistake that someone was covering up." Malik's account introduced the possibility that Rowan had discovered inconsistencies in the financial or operational logs, a secret that might have endangered him. Compelled to learn more about the man behind the evidence, Detective Navarro obtained a warrant to search Rowan's modest apartment, a cramped single-room unit in an aging building on the edge of the Park District. The apartment was unremarkable: a battered sofa, a small desk cluttered with faded photographs and receipts, and a narrow window that overlooked a busy city street. The space carried the scent of stale coffee and old paper. In a locked drawer of a rickety wooden desk, Layla discovered Rowan's personal journal, a leather-bound notebook with a cover scuffed by years of use. Its pages, yellowed and delicate, began as a simple log of daily activities, times he arrived for his shift, brief notes on routine checks, and standard observations of the park's condition. However, as the pages turned, the tone shifted noticeably. Rowan had started recording subtle discrepancies in the park's inventory logs and financial records, small details that, taken individually, might have been dismissed as human error. One entry, written 3 days before his death, read, "There are recurring shortfalls in our ticket sales and supply orders, just a few items missing here and there. It may seem trivial, but the pattern is too consistent to be accidental. I fear that someone is siphoning off resources, and if I pursue this further it could put me in danger." The final entry was abruptly truncated, as if his pen had been snatched away mid-thought, leaving a lingering, ominous void. Meanwhile, the cyber unit recovered fragments of deleted text messages from Rowan's aging cell phone, a device with a cracked screen and faded keys that bore the marks of long, stressful nights. The recovered messages were brief and unembellished. One simply said, "Cease now," and another, "Don't ask questions." Their stark brevity conveyed an unmistakable urgency, a directive that someone, likely with considerable power, was intent on stopping Rowan from uncovering the truth. Detective Navarro's investigation then turned to the administrative records of the park. With permission from management, she accessed both the digital logs and the original paper ledgers maintained in the operations office, a cluttered space filled with stacks of documents, handwritten receipts, and a persistent hum of old computers. Working with a seasoned records clerk named Edwin, whose experience spanned decades of park operations, Layla compared the two sets of records with painstaking attention to detail. The discrepancies were minute at first, a digit off in a sales total here, a date shifted by a day there, but when aggregated over several months they revealed a consistent pattern. The digital logs consistently reported full delivery and complete sales figures, while the handwritten records repeatedly showed slight shortfalls, small differences that over time accumulated into a significant diversion of funds. Forensic accountants were called in, and their analysis confirmed that the cumulative effect of these discrepancies had resulted in the siphoning of a substantial sum, funds that had been covertly transferred through a labyrinth of electronic transactions to an offshore account associated with a shell corporation. The financial evidence was compelling and damning. Every minor discrepancy, when traced meticulously, led back to deliberate manipulation rather than innocent error. The diversion of funds, though minimal in each instance, added up over time to a figure that could only be explained by systematic fraud. The records pointed to a network of mid-level administrators within the park's management, possibly in collusion with external vendors, who had exploited vulnerabilities in the digital system to enrich themselves. As the layers of evidence mounted, anonymous tips began to trickle in. One plain envelope, left on the back desk of the operations office, contained a typed note stating simply, "Every number tells a story." Another tip, sent via a secure email from an untraceable address, warned, "Stop your investigation." Although these messages were sparse, their tone was chilling, a stark indication that someone with a vested interest in concealing the discrepancies was watching closely. Federal agents, recognizing the potential scope of the corruption, were soon brought into the case. Their advanced digital forensic tools allowed them to reconstruct a nearly complete timeline of the deleted text messages from Rowan's phone, revealing that the warnings had escalated in frequency during the final days before his death. At the same time, forensic accountants produced intricate charts that mapped the incremental financial losses caused by the discrepancies, leaving no doubt that the misappropriation of funds was systematic and deliberate. The combined evidence painted a damning portrait. A covert network had been operating under the guise of routine transactions, and when Rowan began to document these irregularities, his discovery threatened to expose a web of deceit. Detective Navarro compiled all her findings into an exhaustive report, a voluminous dossier that spanned over 400 pages. The report interwove photographs of the crime scene in the quiet corridor of the auditorium, scans of pages from Rowan's journal, digital reconstructions of the deleted messages, and detailed financial analyses that traced the diverted funds. The dossier presented a clear, coherent narrative. Over the course of several years, a group of mid-level administrators had manipulated the park's digital and physical records to conceal small recurring shortfalls in ticket sales and supply orders, and the resulting diversion of funds had enriched a hidden network. When Rowan's meticulous documentation threatened to expose the scheme, those responsible had silenced him permanently. The district attorney, deeply troubled by the implications for public trust and the integrity of the park's operations, convened a grand jury in the county courthouse, a stark utilitarian building that had long been the site of pivotal legal decisions. In a series of marathon sessions that stretched late into storm-riddled nights, expert witnesses testified about the digital forensic methods that recovered the deleted messages, the statistical analyses that confirmed the improbability of random errors, and the forensic accounting that traced the diverted funds to an offshore account. Their testimonies were delivered with technical precision and unyielding resolve. After extensive deliberations, the grand jury returned indictments on multiple charges, including fraud, conspiracy, and accessory to homicide, charges that directly linked the systematic record manipulation to the murder of Rowan Pierce. The trial that followed was a grueling legal process, unfolding over several weeks in a crowded courtroom filled with faculty, park employees, community members, and journalists. Federal prosecutors presented their case with unwavering clarity, interweaving digital reconstructions of the deleted text messages with detailed financial charts that illustrated how small discrepancies, when aggregated over time, had diverted a significant sum of money from the park's operating budget. A digital forensics expert demonstrated, on large monitors, how the recovered messages, each a stark command to stop investigating, had been meticulously pieced together, forming a continuous chain that escalated in the days leading up to Rowan's murder. Forensic accountants unveiled complex graphs that mapped the financial diversion in a manner that left little doubt about the deliberate nature of the scheme. Witness after witness, including longtime employees and former suppliers, testified in measured tones about the gradual alterations in the records that had allowed the fraud to persist undetected until it was too late. When Detective Navarro took the stand, her testimony was both precise and laden with personal sorrow. In a calm, steady voice, she recounted every detail, the moment she first discovered the body in that quiet corridor of the auditorium, the careful extraction of Rowan's journal from his modest apartment, and the painstaking process of correlating every digital and physical clue into a coherent narrative of corruption. Her words were deliberate, each sentence reinforcing the devastating cost of a system that had allowed small discrepancies to evolve into a vast network of deceit. The courtroom listened in heavy silence, each juror absorbing the immense significance of a case that had unearthed a long-hidden conspiracy. Ultimately, the grand jury's indictments resulted in the conviction of several mid-level administrators and technical operatives directly implicated in the manipulation of the park's records. They were handed lengthy prison sentences, and their names were recorded in the public record as a stark warning against the abuse of power. Yet, for many in the community, the verdict felt incomplete. The highest-ranking conspirators, the masterminds behind the covert operation, managed to exploit intricate legal defenses, and their identities remained largely redacted from the final verdicts. This unresolved ambiguity left a lingering shadow, a bitter reminder that even when significant corruption is exposed, some secrets may remain hidden in the dark corners of institutional power. In the wake of the trial, the park's management faced a profound reckoning. Under intense public scrutiny, and with independent auditors monitoring every transaction, the management overhauled its digital record-keeping systems. New protocols were introduced that required real-time logging of every ticket sale, every supply order, and every maintenance action. Robust encryption and regular, publicly accessible audits were instituted, ensuring that no detail could be easily altered or concealed again. These sweeping reforms, though unable to reverse the past, signaled a renewed commitment to transparency and accountability that slowly restored public trust in the institution. Local media outlets, driven by a steadfast dedication to investigative journalism, produced a series of documentaries and written reports that meticulously chronicled the case, from the haunting discovery in the dim corridors of the auditorium to the painstaking digital reconstructions that revealed a covert network of fraud. Public forums and town hall meetings emerged as vibrant venues for discussion, where community members, academics, and civic leaders debated the ethics of digital record-keeping and the importance of preserving the truth in an era of rapid technological change. The case of Rowan Pierce, a man whose quiet determination to expose hidden discrepancies cost him his life, became emblematic of the community's enduring fight against corruption, a rallying call that inspired others to scrutinize every detail and hold those in power accountable. For Detective Layla Navarro, every new case was approached with the lessons of Rowan's investigation firmly in mind. In the solitude of her modest office, where the only light came from a solitary desk lamp and the soft hum of her computer, she often revisited the recovered pages of his journal and the stark text of the deleted messages. Every minute detail, every seemingly insignificant anomaly, reaffirmed her belief that the relentless pursuit of truth was essential, no matter how hidden or complex the network of deceit might be. Over time, the legacy of the investigation reshaped not only the internal operations of the park, but also the broader community's approach to accountability. The reformed digital records, once vulnerable to manipulation, became models of transparency, monitored by independent auditors and accessible to any concerned citizen. Public discussions about the ethical responsibilities of data management and the safeguarding of institutional records became commonplace at community centers and city council meetings. The story of Rowan Pierce evolved from a tragic, isolated event into a powerful symbol of resistance against corruption, a reminder that every unaccounted number, every tiny discrepancy, holds the potential to expose a vast network of deceit if pursued with unwavering determination. Though some mysteries lingered, most notably the true identities of the highest-ranking conspirators who had managed to shield themselves behind layers of legal obfuscation, the comprehensive reforms implemented in the aftermath of the trial provided a beacon of hope. New employees were rigorously trained in ethical record keeping practices, and independent oversight committees were established to ensure that every transaction was continuously scrutinized. The memory of Rowan Pierce and the painstaking investigation that uncovered the covert fraud endured as a call to vigilance for the entire community. In the final analysis, the case at the Cinema of Truth was not merely a recounting of a single murder or a series of financial discrepancies. It was an intricate exploration of modern corruption, a narrative woven from digital data, handwritten journals, and the resolute determination of a detective who refused to let even the smallest secret remain hidden. The transformation that followed, from a covert network of record manipulation to a publicly accountable system, was a testament to the power of persistent inquiry. And as the park resumed its nightly routine, with the echoes of laughter, the distant sound of rides, and the soft glow of neon lights, the legacy of that investigation stood as an enduring reminder that every hidden detail matters, and that the unyielding pursuit of truth is the cornerstone of a just society. The stained glass windows of St. Bartholomew's Church caught the last rays of an autumn sun as they cast kaleidoscopic patterns upon the flagstone courtyard. Normally this sacred space brimmed with quiet prayer and community gatherings, but on this chilly November evening, the church's venerable walls would bear witness to a secret that threatened to shatter its centuries-old reputation. At dusk, as the sky shifted from gold to a deep, melancholic blue, Father Daniel Reyes was locking up the sanctuary after evening mass. The church, a majestic structure of ancient stone, arched ceilings, and intricately carved pews, had long been a haven for souls seeking solace. Yet on that night, in the quiet solitude of the sacristy, Father Daniel noticed something disturbing. An envelope, its crisp white paper contrasting sharply with the dark wood of the altar, lay abandoned on a side table near the confessionals. Curiosity piqued. He opened it, revealing a single typed message that read, "The sins of the past will never fade." Shaken, Father Daniel quickly dismissed it as an anonymous note from a troubled parishioner, until a piercing scream shattered the silence of the empty corridor outside the sacristy. Sister Lillian, a young nun responsible for evening prayers in the chapel, had heard the cry and rushed out. In the dim corridor leading to the bell tower, she discovered the body of Anthony Delgado, a respected deacon and mid-level administrator in the church's inner circle. Anthony lay slumped against a stone wall, his clerical collar askew and his eyes open in a final frozen look of shock. His hands, usually steady from years of service, still clutched a single sheet of paper, its text now barely legible in the dim emergency lighting. There was no poetic flourish, just a series of numbers and letters scrawled in haste, as if to encode a secret too dangerous to be spoken aloud. Within minutes, the hushed sanctity of St. Bartholomew's was invaded by uniformed officers and forensic specialists. The heavy scent of incense and candle wax mingled with the sharp tang of disinfectant as every detail was documented. The precise angle of Anthony's limp form, the pattern of footprints in the cool stone floor, the delicate scrap of paper trembling in his grasp. It was immediately clear that this was no random tragedy. Every element of the scene had been arranged with calculated purpose. Detective Marisol Vega, a tenacious investigator known for her unorthodox methods and a reputation for following the faintest threads, was assigned to the case. Arriving at the church under a sky that had turned from indigo to inky black, Marisol moved silently through the now empty corridors. The church's venerable silence was broken only by the distant toll of the bell, a somber reminder of a life interrupted. With gloved hands and a notebook in hand, she examined the scene, the slight smudge of blood on the cold stone, the faint impression of a shoe print near the confessional, and the scrap of paper in Anthony's grasp, its faded characters hinting at secrets buried deep within the church's legacy. Rather than imposing a strict, linear timeline on the events, Marisol opted for a mosaic approach, collecting pieces of testimony, physical evidence, and digital data that would eventually form a broader picture. Her first interview took her to the rectory, where Sister Lillian recounted the harrowing discovery. "I heard a cry and rushed out," Lillian said softly, her eyes downcast as she clutched a rosary. "I found Anthony there, lying against the wall near the bell tower. He looked so frightened, as if he'd seen something no one should see. And then I noticed the paper in his hand. I couldn't understand it, it was just numbers and letters, but they felt like a warning. Lillian's trembling voice and tear-stained cheeks lent a personal weight to the unfolding mystery. Next, Detective Vega spoke with Father Daniel Reyes, whose earlier discovery of the envelope had now taken on a sinister resonance. I thought it was the ramblings of a troubled soul at first, Father Daniel admitted, his voice low and somber. But when Sister Lillian found Anthony, I began to fear that there was something else, a secret within our own midst. Anthony was a man of deep faith and integrity. He wouldn't have been involved in any wrongdoing. Yet his final act seemed to be one of desperate discovery. I recall him mentioning, in passing, that there were inconsistencies in the donation records and discrepancies in our historical ledgers. I dismissed it at the time as administrative error, but now I'm not so sure. Father Daniel's confession hinted that Anthony had been probing into matters that extended beyond routine financial mismanagement. Compelled by these testimonies, Detective Vega obtained a warrant to search Anthony Delgado's modest apartment, located in a small building adjacent to the church's parking lot. The apartment was a humble space, a single room with a modest bed, a worn desk, and a window that offered a view of a bustling city street far removed from the quiet solemnity of the church. In a locked drawer of an old mahogany desk, Marisol discovered Anthony's personal journal, a leather-bound notebook whose cover bore the scars of time and whose pages were filled with careful, precise handwriting. The early entries were innocuous, cataloging his daily tasks, documenting routine maintenance checks, and noting details of the church's internal operations. However, as the entries progressed, a tone of deep concern emerged. In one chilling entry, written just days before his death, Anthony wrote, "There are discrepancies in our donation records. Small amounts are unaccounted for, like missing fragments from a whole picture. I fear that someone within the administration is deliberately altering the books. If I press further, I may uncover a secret that they will do anything to hide." The final entry ended abruptly, as if his pen had been yanked away, leaving an unfinished sentence that echoed in the silence. Simultaneously, the cyber unit managed to recover fragments of deleted text messages from Anthony's battered cell phone, a device with a cracked screen and keys worn smooth from years of use. The recovered messages were curt and chilling. One message simply said, "Stop now," while another warned, "Cease your inquiry." The unadorned language of these texts left no room for ambiguity. Someone had warned him to back off, and it appeared that those warnings had been ignored. With a growing body of evidence, Detective Vega turned her attention to the church's administrative records. In the dusty archives of St. Bartholomew Sei, housed in a secure room beneath the main sanctuary, she combed through both digital files and old handwritten ledgers. Working alongside Hector, a veteran archivist with a soft-spoken manner and an encyclopedic memory of the church's history, she compared the current digital logs with the original records meticulously preserved in leather-bound volumes. The differences were subtle, a few figures here, a slight date adjustment there, but when these discrepancies were tallied over several months, they formed an unmistakable pattern. The digital records invariably showed that every donation and supply order was complete, while the handwritten ledgers repeatedly recorded small, consistent shortfalls. Over time, these seemingly insignificant gaps had accumulated into a significant diversion of funds, a diversion that forensic accountants later confirmed had been channeled into an offshore account linked to a nondescript shell corporation. Forensic accountants were called in to analyze the financial data, and their rigorous work revealed that the cumulative effect of these minor discrepancies had resulted in the misappropriation of a substantial sum of money. The diverted funds, though small on a per-transaction basis, had been siphoned off methodically over a prolonged period. The financial trail, painstakingly reconstructed through electronic records and complex spreadsheets, confirmed that this was no matter of clerical error. It was an elaborate scheme executed by those with intimate access to the church's inner workings. As Detective Vega's investigation deepened, anonymous tips began to surface. A plain envelope, left on a desk in the church archives, contained a typed note that read, "Truths emerge when numbers are questioned." Another tip, sent via a secure email from an untraceable account, warned her to cease your search. Though these messages were sparse, their tone was unmistakably ominous, a clear indication that the perpetrators were monitoring the inquiry and were prepared to act if their secret was threatened. Federal agents, alerted to the magnitude of the potential corruption, were brought into the investigation. Their advanced digital forensic tools enabled them to reconstruct a nearly complete timeline of the deleted messages from Anthony's phone, revealing that the warnings had increased dramatically in the final days before his death. At the same time, forensic accountants produced intricate graphs that mapped the incremental financial losses, clearly demonstrating that the discrepancies were part of a systematic effort to divert funds. The combined evidence formed a damning mosaic. A network of mid-level administrators within the church's management, likely in collusion with external contractors, had exploited vulnerabilities in both digital and physical record-keeping systems to enrich themselves at the expense of the congregation's trust. Detective Vega compiled all her findings into an extensive report, a voluminous dossier that spanned over 400 pages. The report interwove photographs of the crime scene, scans of pages from Anthony's journal, digital reconstructions of the deleted text messages, and detailed financial analyses that traced the misappropriated funds. The dossier presented a compelling narrative over several years. Subtle discrepancies in the church's donation and supply records had been deliberately engineered to divert resources into an offshore account. When Anthony had begun to document these irregularities, his discovery threatened to expose a deeply rooted network of corruption. In response, those involved had taken drastic measures to silence him forever. Deeply disturbed by the evidence, the district attorney convened a grand jury in the county courthouse, a cold, imposing building with a legacy of no-nonsense legal proceedings. In marathon sessions that stretched late into storm-racked nights, expert witnesses testified about the digital forensic techniques used to recover the deleted messages, the statistical analyses that confirmed the improbability of accidental discrepancies, and the forensic accounting that traced the diverted funds to a hidden offshore account. Their combined testimony, delivered with unwavering technical precision, left little doubt that the discrepancies were not random but were the product of deliberate manipulation. After lengthy deliberation, the grand jury returned indictments on multiple charges, including fraud, conspiracy, and accessory to homicide, directly linking the systematic record manipulation to the murder of Anthony Delgado. The trial unfolded over several weeks in a crowded courtroom filled with parishioners, faculty members, local journalists, and concerned citizens. Federal prosecutors presented their case with relentless clarity, interweaving digital reconstructions of the deleted text messages with comprehensive financial charts that illustrated the cumulative impact of the discrepancies. A digital forensics expert demonstrated on large monitors how the recovered messages, each a brief command to stop investigating, had been meticulously pieced together to form a continuous timeline of escalating warnings. Forensic accountants unveiled complex graphs showing how minor errors, when accumulated, resulted in a significant misappropriation of funds that had drained the church's operational budget. Witness after witness testified about the gradual erosion of the integrity of the church's records, small imperceptible changes that over time revealed a broader pattern of deliberate fraud. When Detective Vega took the stand, her testimony was a careful blend of technical detail and profound personal sorrow. She recounted, with measured precision, the moment she discovered Anthony's body in that dim corridor, the cool stone beneath his weight, and the haunting scrap of paper that lay clutched in his hand. Her narrative wove together every fragment of evidence, the altered digital logs, the faded journal entries, the whispered recollections of colleagues, into a coherent and damning portrait of corruption. Every detail was delivered with deliberate calm, each sentence reinforcing the tragic cost of a system that allowed even the smallest discrepancies to be exploited for personal gain. The courtroom listened in heavy silence, each juror absorbing the gravity of a case that had exposed the dark underbelly of an institution once revered for its sanctity and trust. Ultimately, the grand jury's indictments resulted in the conviction of several mid-level administrators and technical operatives directly implicated in the scheme. They were handed lengthy prison sentences, and their names were entered into public records as stark reminders of the perils of corrupt practices. Yet many in the community felt that true justice had not been fully served. The highest-ranking conspirators, the architects of the diversion, managed to shield themselves through complex legal defenses, and their identities remained largely redacted from the final documents. This persistent ambiguity left a bitter taste, a haunting reminder that even when significant corruption is laid bare, some of its deepest roots can remain hidden. In the aftermath of the trial, the church's leadership was forced to confront a new era of accountability. Under intense public pressure and with independent auditors scrutinizing every transaction, the church overhauled its record-keeping systems. New protocols were established that required real-time logging of every donation, every supply order, and every maintenance expense. Advanced encryption and regular public audits were implemented, ensuring that no detail could be altered or concealed again. Though these measures could not undo the tragedy, they represented a resolute commitment to transparency and a promise that no secret would be allowed to undermine the trust of the congregation ever again. Local media, driven by a passion for truth and accountability, produced a series of investigative documentaries that meticulously chronicled the case, from the chilling discovery in the quiet corridors of St. Bartholomew's to the painstaking digital reconstructions that revealed a network of concealed fraud. Public forums and town hall meetings were organized in community centers, where parishioners, scholars, and civic leaders debated the ethics of digital record keeping and the necessity of constant oversight. The story of Anthony Delgado, a humble deacon whose quest for truth cost him his life, emerged as a rallying point, a symbol of the community's enduring fight against corruption, and a reminder that every hidden discrepancy can ultimately expose a vast network of deceit. For Detective Marisol Vega, the case became a defining chapter in her career, a reminder that the pursuit of truth is both a technical challenge and a moral imperative. In the quiet solitude of her modest office, where the glow of a desk lamp illuminated rows of case files and digital logs, she often revisited the recovered pages of Anthony's journal and the stark, unadorned text of the deleted messages. Each carefully documented detail reaffirmed her belief that even the smallest anomaly has the potential to unravel deep-rooted corruption, and that persistent inquiry is essential to preserving the public trust. Over time, the legacy of the investigation reshaped not only the internal operations of St. Bartholomew's Church, but also the broader ethos of the community. The reformed record-keeping systems, once vulnerable to manipulation, now stood as models of transparency, subject to rigorous independent audits and open for public scrutiny. Discussions about the ethical responsibilities of digital data management and the safeguarding of institutional integrity became a regular feature in church forums, civic meetings, and academic conferences. The case of Anthony Delgado evolved from a tragic loss into a powerful symbol of resistance against corruption, a vivid reminder that every unaccounted figure and every subtle error, when pursued with unwavering determination, can expose a network of deceit that ultimately transforms the institutions we rely upon. Though some aspects of the conspiracy remained unresolved, the identities of the top conspirators, still concealed behind layers of legal complexity, the sweeping reforms implemented in the wake of the trial provided a beacon of hope for the future. New staff at the church were rigorously trained in ethical data management, and independent oversight committees were established to ensure that every record was meticulously maintained. The memory of Anthony Delgado and the painstaking investigation that unveiled the covert scheme continued to inspire a renewed commitment to accountability throughout the community. As autumn deepened into winter and the stained glass windows of St. Bartholomew's cast ever-changing hues onto the quiet pews, the legacy of that fateful investigation endured. The digital records, once susceptible to subtle tampering, now served as steadfast guardians of the truth, monitored by independent auditors and available for review by anyone who sought transparency. The story of Anthony Delgado became an enduring call to action, a testament to the belief that even the smallest discrepancy can reveal a vast network of corruption if pursued relentlessly. In that spirit, the community embraced a new era of vigilance, ensuring that every detail, every record, and every hidden secret would eventually be brought to light. The fluorescent lights of Strike City Bowl shone harshly against polished lanes and worn carpeting, their glow competing with the late afternoon sun streaming in through high, narrow windows. The bowling alley, a beloved relic in a sleepy suburban neighborhood, was usually a refuge of friendly competition and laughter. Families and friends gathered here to celebrate strikes and spares, the sound of pins crashing blending with upbeat pop music. Yet on this fateful day, amid the clatter of bowling balls and cheers from a crowded league night, an unspeakable act was about to shatter the facade of joviality. At around 9:45 p.m., as the regulars enjoyed their weekly tournament and neon signs flickered with promise, a piercing cry echoed from the far end of the main hall. Among the throngs of players and spectators, a shocked silence spread like wildfire. It was the first sign that something was terribly wrong. Rafael Moreno, the night manager known for his efficient manner and unflappable poise, was doing his rounds when he noticed a disruption near lane 14, a normally busy lane that on this night was eerily empty. Stepping closer, Rafael's eyes widened at the sight before him. Lying at the edge of the lane on the glossy wax-coated surface was a man, his body unnaturally still. His patterned bowling shoes were scuffed, and his uniform, a smart polo paired with khakis, was disheveled and marked with dark stains. The victim, later identified as Calvin Grant, a mid-level supervisor who had worked at Strike City for years, now lay silent, as if frozen in time. Clutched in his right hand was a small scrap of paper, its message nearly obliterated by smeared ink and the sheen of spilled beverage. There was no elaborate note, just a brief, undecipherable sequence of characters that hinted at something hidden, something that had cost Calvin his life. Rafael's voice trembled as he called for help, and within minutes uniformed officers and forensic teams swarmed the scene. The lively background of laughter and clinking glasses was replaced by the measured clicks of cameras, the soft murmur of investigators, and the dull thud of footsteps on the polished floor. Every detail was recorded: the precise angle at which Calvin's body had fallen, the pattern of stray footprints left in a nearby puddle of spilled soda, and the tiny scrap of paper crumpled in his grasp. It was clear from the meticulous preservation of the scene that this was no spontaneous act of violence. Each element was arranged with an unnerving deliberation. Detective Simone Kim, renowned for her knack for spotting the overlooked and her methodical approach to piecing together complex puzzles, was assigned to the case. Arriving at Strike City Bowl just as the night's energy was beginning to wane, Simone took a deep breath and stepped into the now quiet main hall. The clatter of bowling balls had faded into a haunting echo, and the neon signs cast long, surreal shadows over the empty lanes. With careful steps, she approached lane 14, her gloved hands methodically noting every detail: the faint imprint of a single shoe mark in the spilled soda, the slight smear of blood on the polished surface, and the ragged scrap of paper that lay incongruously in Calvin's hand. Rather than rush to draw conclusions, Simone allowed the scene to reveal its secrets slowly, recording each observation in her battered notebook. Instead of laying out the events in a neat, linear fashion, Simone's investigation unfolded in overlapping fragments, each one a piece of a larger, unsettling picture. Her first move was to gather testimonies from those who had been present during the chaotic moments. In a quiet corner of the lounge area, she sat down with Denise Carter, a longtime employee who had served as the alley's lead attendant for nearly a decade. Calvin was a dedicated man, Denise recalled, her voice low and trembling. He always had a smile, always made sure everything was in order. But that night, I noticed he was distracted, glancing repeatedly at his phone, almost as if he was chasing down an error in the system. I asked him briefly if everything was all right, and he just brushed it off with a strained smile. I never thought something like this would happen. Denise's recollections, though brief, hinted at an undercurrent of anxiety that had gripped Calvin in his final hours. Simone then spoke with Jamal Brooks, a regular player who frequented the alley on league nights. Jamal recalled that earlier in the evening, he had noticed Calvin near the administrative office, speaking with a stern, unidentified man in a dark jacket. I didn't catch their conversation, but I could tell Calvin was agitated. Jamal said, frowning as he recalled the memory. The man in the jacket seemed to be warning him off about something, but I never got the details. Calvin looked troubled afterward, more so than usual. Jamal's account added another layer of complexity, suggesting that Calvin's behavior had been influenced by external pressures, perhaps from someone with something to hide. Determined to uncover the truth behind the tragedy, Detective Kim obtained a warrant to search Calvin Grant's modest apartment, a cramped unit in a building on the outskirts of the neighborhood. The apartment was simple, almost Spartan, a single room with minimal furnishings, a battered sofa, a small desk cluttered with paper receipts and faded photographs, and a narrow window that offered a view of the busy street below. The air was heavy with the scent of stale coffee and old paper. In a locked drawer of the desk, Simone discovered Calvin's personal journal, a leather-bound notebook with a cover worn smooth by years of handling. Its pages were filled with meticulous, neat handwriting. The early entries were innocuous, lists of daily tasks, brief notes on maintenance routines, and mundane observations about the operation of the alley. However, as the entries progressed, Calvin's tone became increasingly troubled. In one chilling entry, written 3 days before his untimely death, he noted, "I've noticed small discrepancies in our supply orders. Every week we're short a few items, just enough to go unnoticed on any given day, but over time it adds up to something significant. I fear that someone in management is deliberately altering the records. If I investigate this further, I worry that I might uncover a secret that someone will kill to keep hidden." The final lines were abruptly cut off, as if his pen had been snatched away mid-thought, leaving a lingering uncertainty that chilled Simone to the core. At the same time, the cyber unit managed to extract fragments of deleted text messages from Calvin's old mobile phone, a device with a shattered screen and worn keys that bore the scars of countless shifts. The recovered messages were curt and unadorned. One read simply, "Stop now," while another stated, "Don't ask questions." The unvarnished tone of these messages left no room for ambiguity. Someone had been issuing a stark warning to Calvin, urging him to abandon his investigation before it went too far. Instead of immediately following a chronological order, Detective Kim's strategy was to let the investigation unfold through multiple interconnected threads. With permission from Strike City management, she turned her attention to the administrative records of the casino's internal supply chain, an archive of digital logs and original paper ledgers housed in a cramped back office near the manager's suite. Working closely with a veteran records clerk named Victor, who had maintained these documents for over 20 years, Simone compared the current digital records with the handwritten logs preserved in a locked cabinet. The discrepancies were subtle, a slight variation in numbers here, a minor shift in dates there. But when these minute differences were aggregated over a period of several months, they formed a clear pattern. The digital records consistently showed that every order was fulfilled completely, while the original logs revealed a recurring shortfall. Over time, these small variances amounted to a significant diversion of funds and resources, a pattern that could not be dismissed as mere clerical error. Forensic accountants were brought in to trace the financial implications of these discrepancies. Their painstaking analysis revealed that the cumulative effect of the minor shortfalls had resulted in the misappropriation of a substantial sum, money that was covertly funneled through a series of electronic transactions to an offshore account associated with a shell corporation. The financial evidence was unequivocal. The misappropriation was deliberate, the result of systematic record manipulation executed over months, if not years. This network of fraud appeared to involve a cadre of mid-level administrators who had exploited vulnerabilities in the digital system, colluding with external suppliers to siphon off funds without attracting immediate attention. As the layers of evidence built up, Detective Kim began receiving anonymous tips. One plain envelope, left on her desk in the records office, contained a typed note that read, "Every figure holds a secret." Another tip, delivered via a secure email, warned, "Cease your investigation immediately." Although these messages provided little detail, their chilling tone reinforced the notion that the perpetrators were not only aware of the inquiry, but were willing to take drastic measures to keep their scheme concealed. Federal agents, recognizing the potential breadth of the conspiracy, were called in to provide their expertise. Their state-of-the-art digital forensic tools reconstructed a nearly complete timeline of the deleted text messages from Calvin's phone, revealing that the warnings had grown increasingly frequent in the final days of his investigation. Concurrently, forensic accountants produced intricate charts and detailed models that demonstrated how the small discrepancies in the supply records, when aggregated over time, diverted a significant portion of funds from the alley's operating budget. The combined evidence painted a damning mosaic over several years. A network of mid-level administrators had exploited the system to siphon off resources, and when Calvin's inquiries threatened to expose the fraud, his life was brutally cut short. Detective Kim compiled all her findings into an exhaustive report, a sprawling dossier of over 400 pages. The report interwove photographs of the crime scene in the bowling alley, scanned images of pages from Calvin's journal, digital reconstructions of the deleted text messages, and detailed financial analyses that traced the misappropriated funds. The dossier presented a coherent narrative. The discrepancies in the administrative records were not accidental, but were part of a deliberate scheme, orchestrated by a network of insiders in collusion with external suppliers. When Calvin discovered the pattern, his investigation put him in the crosshairs of those who had everything to lose if their illicit operation were exposed. The district attorney, deeply troubled by the evidence and its far-reaching implications for public trust, convened a grand jury at the county courthouse, a stark, no-nonsense building with a legacy of landmark cases. Over a series of long, arduous sessions that extended deep into storm-driven nights, expert witnesses testified about the advanced digital forensic techniques used to recover the deleted messages, the statistical analyses that confirmed the improbability of random discrepancies, and the forensic accounting that mapped the diverted funds to an offshore account linked to a shell corporation. Their combined testimony was technical and unyielding, leaving little room for doubt. After extensive deliberation, the grand jury returned indictments on multiple charges, including fraud, conspiracy, and accessory to homicide, that directly linked the systematic manipulation of records to the murder of Calvin Grant. The trial that followed was a marathon legal process, unfolding over several weeks in a packed courtroom, filled with members of the community, legal experts, and a throng of journalists. Federal prosecutors presented their case with meticulous clarity, interweaving digital reconstructions of the deleted messages with detailed financial charts that demonstrated the cumulative impact of the discrepancies. A digital forensics expert took the stand, showing on large monitors how the recovered messages, each a terse command to stop now, formed a continuous chain that escalated in the final days before the murder. Forensic accountants unveiled intricate graphs that tracked how minute errors, when accumulated over time, diverted a significant sum of money from the alley's budget. Witnesses, including longtime employees like Denise and records clerks like Victor, testified in measured tones about the gradual erosion of record integrity, a process so subtle that it had only been uncovered when Calvin began to investigate. When Detective Simone Kim took the stand, her testimony was a blend of technical precision and profound personal sorrow. She recounted, in painstaking detail, the moment she discovered the body in the deserted corridor of the bowling alley, a moment marked by the echo of her footsteps on waxed tile, the soft glisten of spilled soda, and the haunting scrap of paper clutched in the victim's hand. Her narrative wove together the digital and physical evidence, painting a vivid picture of a deliberate, systematic fraud that had been allowed to fester until it culminated in murder. Every detail, from the exact layout of the crime scene to the minutiae of the financial discrepancies, was delivered in a measured cadence that left the courtroom in a heavy, reflective silence. Ultimately, the grand jury's indictments resulted in the conviction of several mid-level administrators and technical operatives directly implicated in the manipulation of Strike City Bowl's records. They received lengthy prison sentences, and their names were recorded in the public record as stark reminders of the perils of corrupt practices. Yet many in the community felt that true justice remained elusive. The highest-ranking conspirators, the architects behind the scheme, managed to evade full exposure by leveraging intricate legal defenses, and their identities remained largely hidden in the final documents. This lingering uncertainty left a bitter residue among those who had fought to expose the truth, a reminder that even when a significant portion of corruption is laid bare, some mysteries may persist. In the aftermath of the trial, the management of Strike City Bowl faced an upheaval. Under intense public pressure and the scrutiny of independent auditors, the digital record-keeping systems were completely overhauled. New protocols mandated real-time logging of every supply order, every maintenance activity, and every transaction, all secured with advanced encryption and subject to regular public audits. While these measures could never undo the tragedy, they represented a firm commitment to transparency and accountability, a promise that no secret, however minute, would be allowed to undermine the integrity of the establishment again. Local media outlets, driven by a commitment to investigative journalism, produced an array of documentaries and in-depth reports that chronicled every phase of the case, from the grim discovery in the dim corridor of the alley to the painstaking digital reconstructions that revealed a covert network of fraud. Community forums and town hall meetings soon became common, with residents, academics, and civic leaders debating the ethics of digital record keeping and the necessity of vigilant oversight in public institutions. The story of Calvin Grant, a humble security officer whose determination to uncover discrepancies cost him his life, emerged as a rallying cry for reform, a poignant reminder that every hidden detail matters. For Detective Kim, every new case was approached with the lessons of Calvin's investigation etched deeply into her mind. In the quiet hours of early morning, in her modest office lit by the soft glow of a desk lamp, she often revisited the recovered pages of his journal and the terse warnings found on his phone. Every minute detail, a slight discrepancy in a ledger, a single digit altered in a digital log, reinforced her belief that the relentless pursuit of truth is the foundation of justice. In the years that followed, the legacy of the investigation reshaped not only the operations of Strike City Bowl, but also the community's broader commitment to accountability. The reformed digital records, once vulnerable to subtle manipulation, now stood as models of transparency, monitored by independent auditors and accessible to any concerned citizen. Public discussions about the ethical responsibilities of data management and the safeguarding of institutional records became a fixture at community centers and city council meetings. The story of Calvin Grant evolved from a tragic, isolated event into a powerful symbol of the community's determination to root out corruption wherever it may lie. Though some elements of the conspiracy remained unresolved, particularly the true identities of the highest-ranking conspirators who still lurked in the shadows, the sweeping reforms implemented in the aftermath of the trial provided hope for a future defined by transparency and vigilance. New employees at Strike City Bowl were trained in the principles of ethical record keeping, and independent oversight committees were established to ensure that every detail was continuously scrutinized. The memory of Calvin Grant and the painstaking work that had exposed a covert network of deception continued to inspire a renewed commitment to truth throughout the community. As autumn deepened into winter, and the neon lights of Strike City Bowl flickered against the cold night sky, the legacy of that long-ago investigation endured. The transformed digital systems, fortified by cutting-edge technology and rigorous public oversight, stood as a beacon of accountability, a constant reminder that even the smallest discrepancy can unveil a vast network of corruption when pursued with unwavering determination. And in every new record reviewed, every anomaly questioned, the spirit of a man who sought nothing more than to reveal the truth lived on, a quiet yet unyielding testament to the enduring power of vigilance and the quest for justice.